The knock came just after midnight. So faint, Thomas Jorenson almost mistook it for a branch against the cabin wall. But then he heard the collapse, a heavy weight sliding down his door, and he was out of bed with his knife drawn before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He pulled the door open, and she fell backward into his home, sprawling across the threshold with her eyes rolled back and skin the color of old moss gone gray at the edges. An orc. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with small tusks protruding from her lower lip and black hair matted to her skull with sweat. Her clothes were travel-stained and torn, her feet wrapped in rags that had once been boots, and when he knelt beside her, his hand came away from her forehead wet and burning. "Christ," Thomas breathed, and for a moment he just stared at her, his mind trying to reconcile the propaganda he'd grown up with. Orcs are monsters. Orcs are killers. Orcs would sooner gut you than look at you with this trembling, helpless girl who had somehow made it to his isolated homestead in the Montana Territory equivalent of this world, miles from the nearest settlement. Her lips moved. He leaned closer. "Please," she whispered, the word barely formed around her tusks. "Please, anyone." Then her eyes closed and she went limp, and Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He hauled her inside, surprised by how heavy she was, all muscle and dense bone, and laid her on his bed because it was the only proper place to put someone this sick. Her fever was catastrophic. He'd seen men die from fevers like this during the war, their brains literally cooking inside their skulls until they seized and stopped breathing. He had maybe hours to bring it down. Thomas worked through the night with the methodical precision his mother had taught him before consumption took her. Cold water from the well, cloths soaked and laid across the orc girl's forehead, neck, wrists. He stripped away her ruined clothing with clinical detachment, trying not to notice the scars that crisscrossed her green skin, the half-healed wounds on her feet, the way her ribs showed too prominently. Wrapped her in his spare sheets. Got water past her lips drop by drop, then spoonfuls of willow bark tea when she was coherent enough to swallow. She thrashed and muttered in a language he didn't understand, words that sounded like gravel rolling downhill. Once she grabbed his wrist with shocking strength and her eyes snapped open, yellow as a hawk's, and she stared at him with such terror he froze. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't understand English any better than he understood Orcish, but something in his tone must have reached her because her grip loosened, and she sank back into delirium. By morning her fever had broken. Thomas was dozing in his chair, jerking awake every few minutes to check she was still breathing, when he heard her stir. He opened his eyes to find her watching him from the bed, conscious and alert despite her obvious exhaustion. In the dawn light filtering through his window, her skin had regained its proper green color, vibrant as spring leaves. They stared at each other for a long moment. "You are human," she said finally, in heavily accented but understandable English. "I am," Thomas agreed. "You're in my home. You collapsed at my door last night. You were dying from fever." She processed this slowly, her gaze traveling from him to the cabin around them, the simple furniture, the cold fireplace, the rifle hanging above the door, the medical supplies scattered across his table. When she looked back at him, her expression was unreadable. "Why did you help me?" It was a fair question. Thomas considered it. "Could not help you," he said finally. "You needed it. I am orc, I noticed. Your people kill mine, my people kill yours." "Yeah, well." Thomas stood and walked to the fireplace, needing something to do with his hands. "I've done enough killing for one lifetime. Got no appetite for letting someone die on my doorstep when I could prevent it." He felt her eyes on his back as he built up the fire. The cabin was cold late autumn in the mountains meant frost every morning now, and he'd neglected the fire while caring for her. He heard her shift on the bed, heard her sharp intake of breath. "My clothes," she said, "were filthy and needed washing. They're drying by the stove." "You're wearing my spare sheet." A pause. Then, "Thank you." The words sounded foreign in her mouth, like she wasn't used to saying them. Thomas glanced back and found her sitting up, clutching the sheet around herself, looking simultaneously defiant and vulnerable. Her tusks caught the firelight when she spoke. "I am Karga," she said, "of the Broken Ridge clan, or I was, Thomas Jorenson, of nowhere in particular." "Why do you live alone out here, Thomas Jorenson?" He poked at the fire. "Same reason you're a long way from your clan, I expect." "Wanted to be somewhere else." Karga was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I walked for 6 days. I was cast out, I had. Disagreement with my clan chief about his plans to raid human settlements. I said it was wrong to kill farmers who had done nothing to us. He said I was weak, corrupted, no longer orc. So he threw you out. He beat me and threw me out with nothing, no food, no weapons, no boots. Said if I loved humans so much I should go die among them." She laughed, a bitter sound. "I almost did." Thomas turned from the fire and studied her properly. Even sick and exhausted, she was striking strong, featured with high cheekbones, those yellow eyes that seemed to see straight through him, black hair that would probably fall past her shoulders when clean. She met his gaze without flinching. "Well," he said, "you didn't die, you're here, and I expect you're hungry." She was. He made breakfast venison from his last hunt, fried potatoes, eggs from his chickens, bread he'd baked 2 days ago. She ate like she was starving, which she probably was, and he tried not to watch her too obviously. There was something mesmerizing about her movements, the way she attacked her food with straightforward intensity, no pretense or delicacy. "This is good," she said around a mouthful of venison. "You cook well. Living alone you learn or you eat poorly. How long have you been alone?" Thomas poured himself more coffee. 3 years, came out here after the war, bought this land from the territory office, built this cabin, been here since. The war between humans. Yeah. He didn't elaborate and she didn't push. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, Thomas could hear his chickens clucking, the rustle of wind through the pines. His homestead was small, just this cabin, a barn, a chicken coop, and 40 acres of forest and meadow he was slowly clearing for crops. Nearest neighbor was 15 miles east. Nearest town was 30 miles west. He'd chosen isolation deliberately. "What will you do with me?" Karga asked eventually. Thomas looked up. "Do with you? I am orc, your enemy. You could kill me, turn me into your authorities, sell me." Her jaw tightened. "I am healed enough now to die fighting if you try." "Jesus Christ," Thomas muttered. "I'm not going to do any of that. What kind of man do you think I am?" "I do not know. That is why I ask." "Fair enough." He set down his fork and met her eyes. "I think you need a place to rest and recover properly. Your fever's broken, but you're still weak. Probably need a week of decent food and sleep before you should be traveling. You're welcome to stay here until you're well." Suspicion flickered across her face. "Why?" "Because it's the decent thing to do. Humans are not decent to orcs. This one is." Thomas stood and started collecting dishes. "Look, you can trust me or not, that's your choice, but I'm offering you a safe place to heal. No strings, no expectations. When you're well, you go wherever you want. Until then, you've got a bed and food, and no one here is going to hurt you." Karga watched him wash the dishes in silence. He could feel her trying to figure out his angle, trying to understand what he wanted from her. He didn't blame her. If the situations were reversed, he'd be suspicious too. Finally she said, "I accept, thank you, you're welcome. But I will not be useless. If I stay, I work. I earn my place." Thomas glanced back at her. She was standing now, wrapped in his sheet like a toga, chin raised proudly despite her bare feet and obvious weakness. There was steel in her spine. "Fine by me," he said. "Rest today. Tomorrow, if you're up to it, there's plenty of work to do." Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Karga's recovery was swift. Orcs apparently healed faster than humans, and by the third day, she was insisting on helping despite Thomas's protests. He gave her his spare clothes, which fit badly but were better than nothing, and set her to tasks that wouldn't overtax her: feeding chickens, gathering eggs, sorting vegetables from his root cellar. She worked with fierce determination, as if trying to prove something. Thomas watched her from the corner of his eye as he chopped wood or repaired the barn roof, or did any of the 1,000 tasks that came with frontier living. She moved with economical grace, no wasted motion, and she never complained. They didn't talk much at first. Karga seemed to expect him to change his mind about her presence, to suddenly reveal some sinister motive. She flinched when he moved too quickly near her. She watched the rifle above the door like she was calculating how fast she could reach it. At night she slept on the floor despite his insistence she take the bed, and he knew she barely slept at all, listening for danger. It made him angry and sad in equal measure, not at her, but at whatever she'd endured to make her this cautious. On the 5th day he killed one of his chickens for dinner. Karga watched from the cabin door as he wrung its neck with practiced efficiency, and when he brought it inside to pluck and clean, she stepped forward. "I will do this," she said. "I know how." He handed her the bird and his knife. She worked with the easy competence of someone who'd prepared many meals, and while she worked she talked, her voice quiet. "In my clan, I was hunter and cook both. My mother taught me before the fever took her different fever, many years ago. My father died in raid when I was small. I had no siblings, so I learned to provide for myself." She glanced up at him. "Your mother taught you medicine, you said. What of your father?" Thomas leaned against the counter. "My father taught me farming and carpentry, how to read the weather and work with my hands. He died when a horse kicked him 5 years back. My mother followed a year later, no siblings for me either. We are both alone then. Seems so." Karga finished cleaning the chicken and started cutting it for the pot. "It is strange," she said. "Human and orc talking like this, like people. My clan said humans were all liars and killers, that they would smile while plotting your death. What do you think now?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think maybe some humans are liars and killers, and maybe some orcs are too, and maybe some of both are just people." Thomas felt something shift in his chest. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe so." Dinner that night was the best meal they'd shared so far. Karga had spiced the chicken with herbs from his garden in ways he'd never thought to try, and the result was rich and complex. They ate by firelight and traded stories, careful stories at first, testing the waters, but gradually more personal. He told her about the war, though he kept the worst details to himself. 3 years fighting for the Union in a conflict that had left him with nightmares and a profound distaste for violence. He'd mustered out with commendations he didn't want, and coin he'd used to buy his freedom in the form of this isolated homestead. She told him about growing up in the Broken Ridge clan, about orcish culture and traditions he'd never heard of. How orcs valued strength and honor above all, but how those concepts had become twisted in recent years, as desperation drove the clans to increasingly brutal raids on human settlements. How she'd watched her people become the monsters humans accused them of being, and how speaking against it had marked her as a traitor. "I do not regret it," she said, staring into the fire. "Speaking truth, even if it costs me everything. That takes courage, or foolishness." She glanced at him. "What do you think?" "I think they are often the same thing." She smiled, really smiled, not the cautious expression she'd shown before, and Thomas felt his heart skip stupidly. Her tusks didn't diminish her smile. If anything, they made it more striking, more uniquely hers. Dangerous thoughts. He shut them down and stood to clear dishes. The weather turned cold that week. Snow started falling on the 7th day of Karga's stay, fat white flakes that meant winter was settling in for real. Thomas woke to find her standing at the window, watching the snow with an unreadable expression. "First snow of the season," he said, coming to stand beside her. "It is beautiful and terrible. I should leave soon before the pass is close." Something clenched in his chest. "Where will you go?" "I do not know. West, perhaps. I heard there are orc communities past the mountains who are more open-minded, who do not raid. Maybe they would take me in." "That's a hard journey, especially in winter." "I know." She turned to face him. "But I cannot stay here forever, Thomas. This is your home. You gave me shelter when I needed it, and I am grateful, but I will not impose longer than necessary." "You're not imposing." "I am orc," she said, and there was something painful in her voice. "You are human. Even out here, even alone, this cannot work. Someone will see me. Someone will come. And when they do, they will kill me and maybe you too for harboring me." Thomas wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The frontier was lawless but not empty, and prejudice against orcs ran deep. If word got out, he was sheltering one of the enemy. "Then stay the winter," he heard himself say. "The passes are already dangerous and they'll be impassable in another week. Stay until spring. By then you'll be stronger, better prepared. I'll help you outfit for the journey." Karga stared at him. "Why would you do this?" "Because I don't want you to leave," he thought, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. "Because somehow in 7 days you've become important to me. Because this cabin is less lonely with you in it. Because when you smile, I feel something I thought died in the war." He said none of that. "Instead, because it's practical, and because I could use the help through winter. It's the hardest season out here alone." She studied his face like she was trying to read the truth beneath his words. Whatever she saw made her relax fractionally. "If I stay, I work. Equal partnership. I will not be charity case. Deal." She held out her hand and he shook it, her grip strong and warm. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. Winter settled over the homestead like a blanket. The snow piled up until it reached the windows, and Thomas and Karga fell into the intimate rhythms of survival. They woke together, worked together, ate together, slept in the same small space, him in his bed, her still insisting on the floor despite his protests. The cabin shrank around them, made warm by the constant fire and their shared presence. Karga was an invaluable partner. She was stronger than Thomas, capable of hauling loads that would have strained him, and she never tired of hard work. Together they brought in firewood until they had a supply that would last months. They repaired the barn before serious storms hit. They hunted together. Karga was a revelation with a bow, her arrows flying true even in wind that would have thrown Thomas's aim off, and they came back with enough venison and rabbit to stock the smokehouse full. But it was the small moments between the work that Thomas found himself treasuring. Karga teaching him phrases in Orcish, laughing at his terrible pronunciation. Her showing him how orcs tracked prey by scent as much as sight, and his surprise when she demonstrated by closing her eyes and pointing unerringly to the spot where a deer had passed hours before. Him teaching her to read English, watching her face light up with wonder as letters became words, became meaning. Her face by firelight as she listened to him read aloud from his small collection of books, absorbed in stories of far-off places neither of them would likely ever see. They learned each other's rhythms. Thomas discovered that Karga sang while she worked low, rumbling songs in Orcish that made the cabin feel ancient and safe. She learned that he was quietest in the mornings, needing silence and coffee before he could properly interact. He found out she had a wry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. She discovered that he carved wood when he was thinking, producing small figures of animals that he pretended weren't important but kept carefully on a shelf. It should have been awkward, this forced proximity. It should have been tense. Instead, it felt natural, like something clicking into place. Thomas tried not to think about what that meant. The first serious storm hit 3 weeks into Karga's stay. The wind howled like a living thing and snow fell so thick they couldn't see the barn from the cabin window. They were trapped inside for 2 days, the world reduced to the space within 4 log walls. "Tell me about the war," Karga said on the second day, both of them restless from confinement. Thomas looked up from the boot he was mending. "Why?" "Because it made you who you are, because you never speak of it except in pieces, because I want to understand." She was sitting cross-legged by the fire, sharpening his knives with steady strokes. "You do not have to." "But I wish to know you, Thomas." Something about the simple honesty of that statement broke through his defenses. So he told her about enlisting at 19, convinced he was fighting for something righteous. About the reality of war, the mud and blood and senseless death, the way violence became mundane, the things he'd done that he could never take back. About the battle that finally broke him, watching boys younger than him die screaming, and deciding that if he survived he would never raise a weapon in anger again. "I killed 37 men," he said quietly. "That I'm certain of, maybe more. They were enemies, soldiers, and it was war, so I suppose it was justified. But justified doesn't mean right, doesn't mean I don't see their faces." Karga set down the knife she was sharpening. "Is that why you live alone? Penance? Maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't figure out how to live among people anymore, how to pretend everything was normal." He met her eyes. "What about you? You said your clan raided, did you?" "No." She shook her head firmly. "I refuse to participate in raids against innocents. That was part of why I was cast out, but I have killed, Thomas, to defend my people, to defend myself. I do not have your guilt about it. I don't feel guilty for defending myself." "No, then what do you feel?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Tired," he said finally. "Just so tired of violence. Of death, of the whole ugly cycle." Karga stood and came to sit beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Then we are the same, you and I, 2 tired souls who want no more of killing." She smiled slightly. "Perhaps that is why we fit together so well." Thomas's breath caught. "Karga, I know," she said softly. "Human and orc. Impossible. But you asked me to stay the winter, Thomas Jorenson, and I see how you look at me. I see it because I look at you the same way." His heart was pounding. "This is a bad idea. Most good things are. Your people would exile you all over again. My people would, Christ, I don't even know what they'd do, nothing good. I am already exiled, and you already chose isolation." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his face. Her palm was warm and calloused. "I am not asking for forever. I am asking for this winter, for truth between us, for whatever time we have." Thomas closed his eyes. Every rational part of his brain was screaming warnings. This could only end badly. They were too different. The world would never accept them. He was setting himself up for heartbreak, but when he opened his eyes and saw her looking at him with such open hope, such cautious vulnerability, all the logical arguments evaporated. "Okay," he whispered. "This winter." She smiled, and it was like sunrise, and when she kissed him it felt like coming home. They were tentative at first, learning the geography of each other. Karga's tusks made kissing different but not difficult, just new, requiring adjustment and attention. Her skin was warm and smooth, her body all lean muscle and surprising softness. She was gentle with him despite her strength, aware of her power, and he found that consideration devastatingly attractive. They didn't sleep together that night or the next. Instead, they explored this new dimension of their relationship slowly, building confidence, holding hands while they worked. Karga sitting pressed against his side while he read to her, him braiding her hair long and thick and beautiful now that it was clean while she hummed her working songs. Kisses that grew gradually less tentative and more hungry. When they finally did make love, it was a week after that first kiss, on a night when the northern lights painted the sky green and purple outside their window. It was tender and awkward and intense, two people trying to communicate in a language beyond words, and when they lay tangled together afterward, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing patterns on her arm, Thomas felt something he'd thought lost in the war settle back into place. Peace. "I think I am falling in love with you," Karga whispered into the darkness. "I did not plan to, I did not want to, but I am." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "Yeah," he said roughly, "me too." She was quiet for a moment, then, "What happens in spring? I don't know." "Will you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out fierce. "God, no, but I don't know if you can stay, if it's safe, if SHH. She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Spring is months away. Let us have this winter, let us have now, the rest will come when it comes." So they did. They had winter. December passed in a blur of snowstorms and firelight. They celebrated Christmas with a feast. Karga helped prepare roast venison and root vegetables, and a pie made with preserved berries, and Thomas carved her a small figure of a hawk, because she'd told him once that hawks were sacred to her clan. She gave him a hunting knife she'd made in secret from materials in his workshop, the handle wrapped in leather and etched with symbols she said meant protection and home. January was brutal, temperatures dropping so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. They barely left the cabin, rationing firewood and food, sleeping curled together for warmth as much as affection. Karga told him stories from orcish legend, epic sagas of heroes and monsters, love stories and tragedies, and Thomas contributed what he remembered from books he'd read, creating a shared mythology between them. February brought a false thaw, and then more snow. They ventured out to hunt, and nearly got caught in a blizzard that would have killed them if they hadn't found a cave to shelter in. They spent that night huddled under their combined coats, taking turns keeping the small fire going, and in the morning when they made it back to the cabin, Thomas held her so tight she laughed and told him he'd crack her ribs. "I thought we were going to die out there," he admitted. "But we did not. We survived together." She cupped his face. "We are strong together, Thomas, stronger than alone." He knew she was right. These months with Karga had changed him fundamentally. The nightmares that used to wake him screaming had faded. The loneliness that had driven him to this isolated homestead had transformed into something warmer, more hopeful. She'd brought light into his darkness, and he desperately needed to believe he'd done the same for her. As March approached and the snow began to melt, they started talking more seriously about the future. "You could come with me," Karga said one evening. They were lying in bed, her tracing idle patterns on his chest. "West, to the orc communities. Some of them accept humans who prove themselves. We could build a life there." "Would they accept me?" "Really," she was quiet. "I do not know, probably not easily. You would always be outsider. Same as you'd always be an outsider in human towns." "Yes." Thomas stared at the ceiling. "What if we stayed here? Here, it's isolated. We're 30 miles from the nearest town and I barely go there anyway. Get supplies twice a year, that's it. No one comes out here. We could make this work, Karga, just keep living like we are. And when hunters come through, when traders stop by, when someone sees me, we'd be careful. You could hide. We'd figure it out. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with an expression caught between hope and sadness. You would do that. Live in hiding, always afraid of discovery so we could be together. I'd do a lot more than that. Thomas. She touched his face gently. I want this too, so much, but I am afraid it cannot last, afraid someone will find out and hurt you because of me. Then we'll deal with it together, like we dealt with winter, like we dealt with that blizzard. He caught her hand and pressed it to his chest. I love you, Karga. I don't say that lightly, and I know this is complicated and dangerous and probably stupid, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want spring to come and have you walk out of my life. Tears gathered in her yellow eyes. I love you too. I want to stay. I want to believe we can make this work. So believe it. Stay with me. We'll figure out the rest as we go. She kissed him then, deep and desperate, and he tasted salt and hope and fear all mixed together. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will stay. I will stay with you, Thomas Jorenson, and we will make this impossible thing work somehow. Relief flooded through him so intense it was almost painful. He pulled her close and held her like she might vanish, and he felt her heart beating against his chest in perfect synchronization. They had made their choice. Now they just had to live with the consequences. Spring came slowly, as it always did in the mountains. The snow melted in patches, revealing mud and dead grass and the first brave shoots of new green. The chickens became more active, laying eggs with renewed enthusiasm. The air lost its knife-edge cold and became merely chilly. And with the thaw came the reality Thomas had been dreading: other people. The first visitor was a trapper named Samuel who stopped by in late March, looking to trade pelts. Thomas saw him coming from a distance and rushed to warn Karga, who disappeared into the root cellar with practiced speed. The exchange was tense. Samuel was friendly enough but curious about Thomas's winter, about whether he'd been lonely, about whether he'd seen any sign of orcs in the area. They say there's been a female on the run since fall, Samuel said, accepting the coffee Thomas offered. Rogue from one of the mountain clans. Dangerous, probably. You keep your rifle close, Thomas. Can't trust orcs, especially the females. They're tricky. I'll keep that in mind, Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. Haven't seen any sign of orcs, though. Good, good. Well, you see anything, you get word to town. There's a bounty on this one. $200. After Samuel left, Thomas found Karga sitting on the cellar floor with her knees drawn up and her face buried in her arms. She didn't look up when he climbed down the ladder. $200, she said, her voice muffled. That is what my life is worth to them. Thomas sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. You're worth everything to me. Today you hid me. Tomorrow you will hide me again, and the day after and the day after. Is this how you want to live? If it means keeping you safe, yes, she pulled back to look at him. You are a fool, Thomas Jorenson. Yeah, well, you're stuck with me. She laughed wetly and kissed him. Then we are both fools. More visitors came as spring progressed, traders heading west, a surveyor mapping the territory, a family of settlers who'd gotten turned around and needed directions. Each time, Karga hid in the cellar, in the barn, once in the chicken coop which she complained about for days, and each time Thomas played the role of the isolated bachelor homesteader, friendly but not too friendly, helpful but not too curious. It was exhausting and stressful, and Thomas could see it wearing on Karga. She became quieter, more prone to staring out the window at the forest. She worked with the same fierce determination, but there was a brittleness to her now, like she was waiting for something to break. It broke in April. Thomas had ridden into town for supplies, a trip he'd been putting off but couldn't delay any longer. Karga had wanted to come, but they both knew that was impossible. He'd left her with enough food and firewood to last days, with strict instructions to stay inside and out of sight, and he'd made the 30-mile journey with his heart in his throat the whole time. Town was the same as always, a collection of rough buildings serving the scattered homesteaders and trappers of the region. Thomas bought flour and sugar and coffee and other staples, trying to work quickly so he could get back to Karga. He was loading his wagon when he overheard the conversation. "Organizing a hunting party. That orc girl's been spotted again, just 20 miles north of here. Figure she's holed up somewhere in the high country." Thomas's blood went cold. He turned casually, trying to look unconscious, and saw a group of men gathered outside the general store. He recognized a few of them local hard cases, the kind who enjoyed violence a little too much. "I still say she's got help," one of them was saying. "No orc survives a winter alone out here. Someone's sheltering her. Then we find them both. Make an example. When do we ride?" "Tomorrow morning. And we don't stop until we've got her head on a pike." Thomas finished loading his supplies with hands that shook only slightly, paid the storekeeper, and got out of town as fast as his horse could manage without drawing attention. His mind was racing. 20 miles north, that wasn't him. His homestead was 30 miles west. But if they were hunting that area and didn't find anything, they'd expand their search. It was only a matter of time. He made it back to the cabin in record time, pushing his horse harder than he should have. Karga met him at the door, her face anxious. "What happened?" He told her everything while he unhitched the horse and brought the supplies inside. She listened in silence, her expression growing more closed with each word. "I have to leave," she said when he finished. "No." "Thomas, they are hunting me. If they find me here, they will kill you too." "Then we leave together, right now. We pack what we can carry and head west into the real wilderness. Find those orc communities you talked about. Start over." Karga stared at him. "You would abandon your home. Everything you built. This is just a place. You're my home now," her eyes filled with tears. "I cannot ask you to do this." "You're not asking, I'm offering." He took her hands. "Karga, I meant what I said. I'm not losing you. If staying here means they find you, then we don't stay here. We go somewhere they can't follow. The journey will be hard, dangerous. So was winter. We managed. You will have no home, no safety. You will be fugitive like me. I'll be with you, that's enough." She pulled him into a fierce embrace, and he felt her trembling. "You are either the bravest man I have ever known or the most foolish. Probably both." She laughed against his shoulder. "When do we leave?" "Tonight, as soon as it's dark. We'll take the horses and what supplies we can carry, move fast and quiet. Put as much distance as possible between us and that hunting party." They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Thomas packed his essential tools, warm clothes, dried food, ammunition for his rifle. Karga gathered medicines and cookware and blankets. They worked with focused efficiency, speaking little, both aware that they were closing this chapter of their lives. As the sun set, Thomas stood in the doorway of his cabin one last time. He'd built this place with his own hands, log by log. It was supposed to be his sanctuary, his fresh start after the war. And it had been that, but it had become something more when Karga arrived. Now he was leaving it behind, and he found he didn't care nearly as much as he'd expected. "Ready?" Karga asked softly from behind him. Thomas turned to look at her. She stood in the gathering darkness, strong and beautiful and brave, everything he'd never known he needed. She was wearing his spare coat and carrying a pack that would have burdened most men, and she was looking at him with such trust it made his chest tight. "Ready," he said. They rode west as night fell, the forest closing around them like a protective hand. The next weeks were the hardest of Thomas's life. They traveled primarily at night, following game trails and stream beds, avoiding any sign of human habitation. Karga's knowledge of wilderness survival was invaluable. She knew which plants were edible, how to find water, how to cover their tracks. Thomas contributed his hunting skills and his ability to navigate by the stars, and together they made steady progress deeper into the mountains. But it was grueling. They slept in shifts, never fully resting. Food was scarce. They didn't dare make fires most nights, so they ate dried rations and cold meals. The weather was unpredictable, warm one day and snowing the next. Twice they had to hide while groups of riders passed nearby, and once they heard dogs baying in the distance, hunters on some trail. Through it all, Karga never complained. She set their pace and kept them moving even when Thomas was ready to collapse. She sang her working songs quietly to keep their spirits up. She held him at night when the nightmares came back, whispering that they would make it, they would survive, they would find safety. He believed her because he had to. 3 weeks into their flight, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a valley below. Not just one fire, dozens of them, spread across a considerable settlement. As they drew closer, Thomas realized what they were seeing: an orc village, large and established with permanent structures and cultivated fields. "I did not think we would actually find it," Karga breathed. "I hoped, but—" They approached cautiously. Orc sentries intercepted them before they reached the village, proper 3 warriors who materialized from the trees with drawn weapons. They looked at Thomas with undisguised hostility and at Karga with confusion. There was a rapid exchange in Orcish, too fast for Thomas to follow. He caught his own name and Karga's and something about clans and exile. The sentries argued among themselves, clearly uncertain what to do with this unexpected pair. Finally, the largest one spoke in accented English. "You come with us. Chief will decide your fate." They were escorted into the village, and Thomas tried not to stare. He'd never seen an orc community before, had never imagined one like this. There were homes, workshops, children playing in the street, orcs of all ages going about their business, stopping to stare as the strange procession passed. It looked almost normal, like any human settlement, just with green-skinned inhabitants and different architecture. The chief was a massive male orc named Grommer, with graying hair and tusks decorated with carved symbols. He listened intently as Karga explained their story: her exile, finding refuge with Thomas, falling in love, fleeing the hunting party. When she finished, Grommer turned his attention to Thomas. "You left your home for this orc female?" he asked in heavily accented English. "Yes," Thomas said steadily. "Why?" "Because I love her, because she's worth more than any place or property, because the world that would hunt her for being orc is not a world I want to be part of." Grommer studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Karga and said something in Orcish. She responded, her voice firm. They went back and forth, and Thomas watched Karga's posture change from defensive to hopeful. Finally, Grommer raised a hand for silence. He looked between them, and something like approval flickered across his weathered face. "In my youth," he said in English, clearly for Thomas's benefit, "I fought many humans, killed many, hated many, but I have lived long enough to know that hate serves no one. This village is for orcs who wish to live in peace, who are tired of endless war." He paused. "We do not accept humans easily. Trust is earned, not given, but Karga speaks well of you and you have proven yourself by your actions. You may stay. But you will work, you will contribute, and you will be watched. If you betray us, you die. Understand?" Thomas nodded. "I understand." "And you," Grommer said to Karga, "you were cast out by your clan for speaking truth. That shows strength of character. You are welcome here as full member of this community. Your exile is ended." Karga's eyes widened. "Thank you, Chief. Thank you're human. Not many would make such sacrifice." Grommer gestured to one of the sentries. "Show them to guest lodge. Tomorrow we will discuss permanent arrangements." They were given a small cabin on the edge of the village, simple but solid. As soon as the door closed behind them, Karga turned to Thomas and kissed him fiercely. "We made it," she said against his lips. "We actually made it." Thomas held her tight, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally draining away. "We did, together. Are you sure about this? This village, this life, it is not what you knew. Neither were you at first. And look how that turned out." He smiled at her. "I go where you go, Karga, that's the deal," she laughed, the sound joyous and free. "Then we stay. We build a life here. We are home, and they were. The next months were an adjustment." Thomas was the only human in a village of nearly 200 orcs, and while Grommer had granted him sanctuary, not everyone was happy about it. There were suspicious looks and cold shoulders. Young orc warriors who challenged him to tests of strength and skill. Elders who questioned his presence at every turn. But Thomas had survived war and isolation and a desperate flight through wilderness. He could handle social discomfort. He worked harder than anyone, taking on the dirtiest jobs without complaint. He learned Orcish properly, struggling through lessons that made the children giggle at his pronunciation. He shared his knowledge of human carpentry and farming techniques, proving his worth through contribution. And slowly, grudgingly, the village began to accept him. It helped that Karga was flourishing. She threw herself into community life with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. She hunted for the village stores, taught young orcs tracking techniques, helped organize the defenses. She laughed more than Thomas had ever heard, surrounded by her own people for the first time since her exile. Watching her come alive like this made every hardship worth it. They married in the orcish fashion 6 months after arriving. It was a simple ceremony, Karga and Thomas standing before Chief Grommer and the village elders, making vows in both Orcish and English. They promised to protect each other, provide for each other, be true to each other until death. There were no rings or fancy clothes, just 2 people committing to face life as one. When Grommer declared them bound, the village erupted in celebration. Even the orcs who'd been most skeptical of Thomas seemed moved by the genuine emotion between him and Karga. There was feasting and singing and dancing that lasted until dawn, and Thomas found himself pulled into the festivities, taught orcish dances by patient partners, included in toasts given in a language he was still learning. Happy. Karga asked him in a quiet moment, both of them sitting apart from the celebration, watching the village dance and laugh. "Extremely," Thomas said. "You, more than I thought possible." She leaned against him. "When I collapsed at your door, burning with fever, praying to any god that might listen to help me, I never imagined it would lead to this, to you, to home." Thomas kissed her temple. "You said you prayed." "In my delirium, yes, I asked for mercy, for someone to help me. I did not think anyone would answer. But I did. You did. By morning my fever had broken and I woke to find a human caring for me with such gentle competence. It seemed impossible, like a miracle. Not a miracle, just 2 people who needed each other finding each other at the right time." Karga smiled. Perhaps that is what miracles are. They sat together as the celebration continued around them, and Thomas reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A year ago he'd been alone, convinced he'd always be alone, that peace was something other people found. Now he was married to an orc woman in a village of orcs, accepted and included, building a life he'd never imagined wanting. It wasn't what he'd planned. It was better. Their first winter in the village was easier than the one at Thomas's cabin, but only just. The village had more resources and more hands to share the work, but they also had more mouths to feed and more people depending on successful preparation. Thomas and Karga worked alongside everyone else to lay in supplies, repair buildings, ensure the herds were ready for the cold months. When the snows came, they hunkered down in the cabin they'd been given larger now, expanded with Thomas's carpentry skills and the help of neighbors who'd become friends. They shared meals with other village families, participated in the communal storytelling sessions that kept spirits up during the darkest months, and slowly wove themselves deeper into the fabric of this community. In February, Karga told Thomas she was pregnant. He stared at her, the announcement not quite processing. Pregnant? Yes, she was watching him nervously. I know we did not plan this. I know a half-orc child will face challenges neither of our peoples will make easy. But Thomas, I want this. I want a family with you. The joy that flooded through him was so intense he could barely speak. He pulled her into his arms and held her carefully, aware suddenly of the precious cargo she carried. I want it too, he said roughly. God, Karga, a child, our child. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. You are happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and so happy I can barely breathe. She laughed and kissed him, and they held each other while the wind howled outside and the fire crackled warmly. And Thomas thought about the future with a hope he'd never expected to feel again. Their daughter was born in September, as the leaves turned gold. The birth was attended by the village's experienced midwives, and Thomas was banished from the cabin along with all the other anxious fathers. He paced outside for hours, listening to Karga's labored breathing and occasional groans, resisting the urge to burst through the door. Finally, as the sun set, he heard a cry thin and outraged and absolutely beautiful. One of the midwives, an older orc woman named Shira, opened the door with a smile. You have a daughter, Thomas Jorenson. Both mother and child are healthy and strong. He rushed inside to find Karga propped up in bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up as he entered and her smile was pure sunshine. Come meet your daughter, she said softly. Thomas approached almost reverently. Karga pulled back the blanket and he looked down at the smallest, most perfect person he'd ever seen. She had Karga's green skin, though lighter. She had tiny tusks already visible. She had Thomas's nose and his brown eyes. She was beautiful and strange and absolutely theirs. Hello, he whispered, touching one tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around his immediately, her grip surprisingly strong. Hello, little one. What should we call her? Karga asked. They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his daughter's face, Thomas knew exactly what felt right. Hope, he said. Her name is Hope. Karga's eyes filled with tears. Hope, yes, that is perfect. They named her Hope Jorenson, and she became the heart of their family. The village embraced Hope with a warmth that surprised and moved Thomas. She was not the first half-orc child born there. There had been others over the years, products of raids or captivity or rare consensual unions, but she was the first born to parents who were genuinely married and committed. That meant something to the community. It meant the future might hold more than just separation and conflict. Hope grew quickly, hitting milestones that amazed her parents. Karga taught her Orcish and Thomas taught her English, so she babbled in both languages indiscriminately. She was strong like her mother and curious like her father, constantly getting into everything, and Thomas had never been so exhausted or so happy. She will grow up knowing both her heritages, Karga said one evening, watching Hope toddle around their cabin on unsteady legs. She will never have to choose one or the other. She will be whole. And she'll grow up knowing her parents love each other, Thomas added, that different peoples can come together. That's worth more than anything. Karga took his hand. You are a good father, a good husband. A good man, Thomas Jorenson. I thank whatever God brought you to my door that night. That was you. You're the one who made it to my cabin. You're the one who survived. We both survived. And now we build more than survival. We build a life, a family, a future. Thomas pulled her close, watching their daughter play, and felt complete in a way he'd never imagined possible. Years passed. Hope grew from toddler to child to young girl, bright and fierce and kind. Thomas and Karga built a larger home. As their family expanded, a son named River was born when Hope was 3, and a second daughter they named Dawn arrived 2 years after that. The cabin became a house. The house became a home filled with laughter and love, and the chaos of raising children. Thomas became respected in the village, his initial outsider status fading as he proved himself year after year. He served on the village council, helped mediate disputes, taught young orcs carpentry and young humans who occasionally found their way to the village that not all orcs were enemies. Karga became one of the chief's advisors, her intelligence and her unique perspective valuable to a community trying to navigate between two worlds. They were happy. It wasn't always easy. There were still humans who viewed orcs as monsters, still orcs who couldn't forgive human violence, but within their village, they found peace. They found home. On a cool autumn evening, 15 years after that night when a feverish orc girl collapsed at his cabin door, Thomas sat on his porch watching the sunset. Hope was 19 now, training to be a hunter like her mother. River was 12 and obsessed with learning every story anyone would tell him. Dawn was 10 and wanted to be a healer. They were all inside helping Karga prepare dinner, and Thomas could hear their voices through the window arguing and laughing and alive. "You look contemplative," Chief Gromer said, climbing the porch steps. The chief was ancient now, his hair pure white, but his mind was still sharp. "Just thinking about how I got here," Thomas said. "Seemed impossible once. Many good things do until they happen." Gromer settled into the chair beside him. "You have done well, Thomas Jorenson. Your family thrives. The village is stronger for your presence. You have proven that human and orc can not just coexist but flourish together. We got lucky. Luck had little to do with it. You made a choice that night to help someone who needed it, despite every reason not to. You made another choice to leave your home rather than let the woman you loved face danger alone. And you have made 1,000 small choices since to be part of this community, to raise your children in 2 traditions, to build bridges instead of walls. That is not luck. That is character." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Chief. Thank you, my friend, for showing us that change is possible, that the old hatreds need not define us forever." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside, Karga called that dinner was ready, and Thomas heard his children stampeding toward the table with the enthusiasm of hungry teenagers. "Coming," he called back and turned to Gromer. "Join us. I would be honored." They went inside together, and Thomas looked around his home at the family he'd never expected to have, in the community he'd never imagined joining, living a life that had seemed utterly impossible, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. That night, after the children were asleep and Gromer had gone back to his own home, Thomas and Karga lay in bed together. She was reading by candlelight, and he was carving still his favorite way to think. He was working on a small hawk for Dawn, who'd asked for one like the figure he'd made for Karga years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Karga asked, setting down her book. "That night you showed up at my door. How different everything would be if I'd made any other choice." She smiled. "I was burning with fever and whispering prayers I did not think anyone would hear. And you answered both. By morning cooled my fever and became the answer to every prayer I did not know to speak." She reached over and took his hand. You saved my life that night, Thomas. You saved mine right back. I was dying in that cabin, just slower, dying of loneliness and purposelessness and trying to outrun my past. He set down his carving and turned to face her fully. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me hope, the feeling before the daughter. We saved each other then. Yeah, we did. She kissed him softly. I love you, Thomas Jorenson. I will love you until the day I die and whatever comes after. I love you too, Karga Jorenson. Always. They held each other in the candlelight, two people from different worlds who'd found their way to each other through chance and choice and stubborn determination. Outside, the village slept peacefully. Their children dreamed safely in the next room. The fire burned low and warm. Everything they'd built, this family, this home, this life, had started with one small act of compassion in the middle of the night. With a door opened instead of barred. With help offered instead of denied. With love chosen over fear. And it had been worth every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, because they'd found each other, and in finding each other they'd found themselves. They'd found home. As Thomas drifted toward sleep with Karga warm in his arms, he thought about that desperate girl who'd collapsed at his threshold, barely alive, praying for mercy. He'd given her what little he could that night, shelter and medicine and basic human decency. She'd given him everything in return. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sound of his children laughing in the kitchen and the smell of Karga's cooking, and he lay there for a moment just listening, just being grateful. Then he rose and joined his family for breakfast, ready to face another day in the life they'd built together. A life that had started with fever and prayer, and one man's choice to answer both. A life that had become more than either of them ever dreamed possible. A life that was, simply and completely, home.